all talk about the madness WWE got up to during the Attitude Era, but what about the time we moved forward and enjoyed ruthless aggression? Widely regarded as the next phase, you would think things switched around to establish that we were moving on to pastures new. Nope, and in fact, some of what we did was even more nuts. So please do brace yourself, my friends, cause yeah, this is the 10 most infamous WWE Ruthless Aggression Era controversies. Number 10, the Billy and Chuck wedding. This should have been a moment in time. It would have been better if we did it with two homosexual men to underline that it's perfectly fine for two males to be in love and get married, but this is what we had. If nothing else, it would be a fine message to send out to an audience, and then WWE went the other way entirely. For those that don't know, Billy Gunn and Chuck Palumbo did join forces in November 2001, with the idea being there was every chance they were gay. This was heavily insinuated without being outright said, but to get this across, they were overly flamboyant and wore pink. I mean, that was silly. We don't need to lean on stereotypes. The thing is, the company even reached out to the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation to consult on this storyline, so there was a little bit of confidence. Maybe this was going to be a proper finger flip to bigots across the land. Glad, as they're also known, admitted that WWE had promised to air the Billy and Chuck wedding too, which really did have some intrigue behind it, when we flipped that switch. Because even though for weeks we did advertise that they were going to tie the knot, it turned out this was a publicity stunt, with Billy being scripted to say, "We're not gay," as if this was a terrible thing. It is really not cool at all. Thankfully, we would never do this sort of thing today, but here's the kicker. We shouldn't have been doing it then either. Number 9, the Katy Vick angle. I mean, where on earth do I begin? If you know, you can just stare off into the distance for a while and cry, and if you don't, well, I suppose I'm going to have to tell you. Make sure you're sitting down. In the fall of 2002, we learned that Kane had killed a woman. Yep, this was after Triple H had accused him of being a murderer on Raw, and in a bid to explain himself, the Big Red Machine admitted his pal Katy Vick was dead, but it was because he was driving a car that he wasn't used to and crashed. He survived, she was dead. What on earth are we doing? Hunter then pushed this boat out by telling Kane he had been drinking behind the wheel, and that's why it happened, and that when doctors did an autopsy, they found the masked man's semen in her body. I am not making any of this up. This then turned into some awful unrequited love storyline. To try and get one over Kane, Triple H did indeed sneak into a funeral parlor and pretended to hump a corpse. I don't know how else to explain it, the absolute worst bit being this was a real place with an actual funeral going on in the next room. The vision of Trips doing this is burned into anybody's brain who watched it live, and I tell ya, I took a break from wrestling after this. You will be stunned to hear I had no interest watching a man have fake sex with a mannequin that was meant to be a deceased human. I mean, who the hell could have ever have called that one? Number 8, Muhammad Hassan. We are getting into it now, and I'm crying again. It's just a question of taste mostly, although once again WWE actually acted like they had a nuanced idea at the start of this. The world had become a very worrying place after the 9/11 attacks, and the racism aimed at many Arab Americans was terrible. Therefore, why not have a character that calls out the nation for this stance and how it has to change? Yeah, cool. Right, I get that. Shine a mirror onto people's biases and let's see if we can't craft a very deep storyline. The problem, as ever, is that it is wrestling, so within weeks, Muhammad Hassan, who had been invented to carry this idea, was turned into the worst of all stereotypes. There's that word again. While Hassan was meant to be received as a persecuted figure, WWE was soon going back to the old foreign menace tropes, with the absolute worst part being, number 7, the worst angle ever. That's right, we bookend all of this because it feels like they deserve their own entries, and once again I'll do my best to explain. Come 2005, the Hassan gimmick was full on controversial and in bad taste, with nationalism and patriotism taking center stage. Vince McMahon then decided The Undertaker would be a great opponent for Muhammad to defend America, when Hassan and a group of masked men turned up on SmackDown and beat up the Phenom, and it was made out like it was a terrorist attack. Now, this would have been horrendous anyway, but the real shock to the system is the fact this happened just days after the London bombings. We are now talking next level offensive. The backlash was loud and angry as it should have been, and unsurprisingly, TV network UPN told the company to get this off the show instantly. I think at this stage, even WWE realized they screwed up, and poor Mark Kapani, who had been cast in this role, never wrestled again. It wasn't his fault, was just doing what he was told. Either way, though, this was bottom of the barrel nonsense. Number 6, Triple H versus Booker T. It's only fair to say that Booker T has spoken out about this angle, and he gets to have the final say on this matter. He was in it was his story, so anything that comes out of my mouth moves into a lesser position. If we are talking about moments that left people reeling, though, you do have to throw it in there. And the major reason for this was because WWE decided to make it about race. Yep. I'm not going to get into how they approached this because as ever there was no nuance to it, and instead we had lines that were meant to sound like Triple H and Ric Flair thinking a black man shouldn't be in the position of a world champion. It really was quite astonishing. To try and give some back and forth to this, Bruce Pritchard said on his podcast this was designed to bury WCW, but if that's the case, I'm not sure why we throw in lines like nappy hair. That to me feels abusive and rude. There was also the frequent use of the term you people, which turns my stomach to be honest, but I tell ya, even if this is what WWE wanted to do, there would have been a perfect out when we got to WrestleMania 19 and Booker T just whipped the game's ass. You're damn right. Teach the world that you can't be prejudiced without serious consequences. And then we got to that day and Triple H won. No. Even right now, I don't get why we did this other than silly backstage politics, because even if you do get rid of all of the above, at WrestleMania, just have the good guy go over. This wasn't cool. This wasn't cool at all. Number 5, the Eddie Guerrero exploitation. Once again, I want to make it clear that people like Rey Mysterio have spoken out about this. They get the final say. We were just the watchers. As a fan viewing this, though, it did feel very uncomfortable after the tragic passing of Eddie Guerrero in November 2005, mostly because we kept on going back to it. I don't think anybody minded Rey Mysterio winning the 2006 Royal Rumble and dedicating it to Latino heat. That was emotionally heartbreaking, but it was the other side that raised eyebrows. For example, given that Randy Orton was feuding with Mysterio at the time, he was scripted to say that Eddie was in hell. I mean, I now feel rotten having to repeat that, and let's be fair to Randy too. He told everyone backstage he didn't think this was right. What could he do? I suppose the best way to underline it is that we went too far into almost using Guerrero's passing to sell stories, as opposed to having them as a loving tribute. And sure, maybe Eddie would have wanted this, which was the constant defense, but many fans still felt like it was in bad taste. They didn't want to see it either way. The real sore spot was even though it was there to send Ray to the moon, WWE never really pushed him properly, and even when he was the champion, it was something of a damp squib. Just got beaten over and over again. Not really the greatest idea when you're fighting for the memory of a friend who is no longer with us. Number 4, the JBL character. Let's get it straight before we go on. JBL was a heat magnet. In 2004, I don't think anyone thought the former Bradshaw had this in him, but he made the necessary changes and became an awesome bad guy world champion on SmackDown. People hated him. When you jumped into the internet discussion, however, the controversy came in the fact that WWE had literally taken him from the APA and made him the guy from nowhere. That is true, and if you need an up-to-date version of this, it would be Jinder Mahal. Just one day woke up and boop, the guy who had been presented to us as no threat all of a sudden had a major title. It was jarring. I think the main reason JBL gets in here is because of the direction we went in. As he was feuding with Eddie Guerrero, Bradshaw headed to the Mexican border and basically shouted about immigrants in the most racist way possible. If you were indeed Latino yourself, this probably left your jaw on the floor. Kurt Angle addressed this on his podcast too and said something similar. He felt like Eddie could have spoken to management about this, but instead saw Guerrero use it to his advantage to get as much sympathy as possible. Again though, maybe we just stay away from this stuff. There really is no need. Number 3, Dr. Heinie. Oh no. Let me just tell you the truth. Vince McMahon loved taking shots at Jim Ross on air. I don't know why, fans don't know why, not even JR knows why. He has spoken about this on his podcast. It just feels unnecessary and sometimes mean. It is a testament to Jim that he was able to basically shake this off and carry on regardless. But in 2005, when Ross underwent a colonoscopy, McMahon thought it was so funny, he was going to do a routine on Raw. Now, I don't know about you, but even before anything else, I don't want my boss telling people that I just had a colonoscopy. The skit itself was just bonkers too, as Vince dressed up as Dr. Heinie before telling his scantily clad nurse friend to start removing massive objects out of JR's ass. I'm not even kidding, this went on for about 20 minutes. So not only did Ross have to sit through that, but his friends saw it, his family saw it, and if you were a fan tuning in, you got it too. Bruce Pritchard again has defended this, saying it was done out of love and respect, but I defer to Jim's late wife on this one. By all accounts, she was in tears after this, so once again, just don't do it. Number 2, the Chris Benoit double murder-suicide. I do not like talking about this. Maybe that makes me a coward, but it is up there as one of the worst moments in wrestling history, and another time where I just stopped watching for a while. Sports entertainment didn't feel that fun anymore. It does feel important to keep the conversation going out of respect for Nancy Benoit and son Daniel though, because if nothing else, their memory should not be forgotten. Nancy too had an incredible career in pro wrestling, deserves to have a spotlight shone on it. Nothing created as much controversy as this though, as it went far outside the world of wrestling. Major news outlets everywhere were covering it, which soon turned into an accusation of steroid use, CTE, and all manner of issues. It was just horrendous. In case you don't know, the headlines are that Chris Benoit murdered his wife and son before taking his own life, and ever since the story has unraveled. The amount of drugs Chris was taking, the damage to his brain, the grief he had over the death of best friend Eddie Guerrero. I am certainly not saying any of these are excuses. It was just a narrative that continued to grow and expand. As the response to any mention of this is always, but he should still go into the Hall of Fame, I would just like to say, that is a mad reply. No matter what you did within a wrestling ring, it pales in comparison to such a needless and shocking tragedy. It shouldn't and will never happen. Number 1, the sad amount of deaths. This is the reason that modern day wrestling wins. Even if you think it was better way back when, during the Ruthless Aggression Era especially, so many stars passed away too young, it almost became the norm. That should never be the case. A lot of it was due to the drug use that was prevalent at the time, which was one of the reasons Eddie Guerrero passed away. He had cleaned himself up by 2005, but ultimately the damage he had done to his body was way too much. Kurt Hennig was another, as was the likes of Crash Holly, Tense, and Lance Cade. But it was the statistics that really got people. The average life expectancy of a pro wrestler who starred in the United States across the 80s and 90s was below any other occupation in the land. As of 2015, the mortality rate was 2.9 times greater than the wider male population. Now, we all know that wrestling is an incredibly hard industry that does a number of those within it, but this was just too much. That's why it's so important we did clean things up, and when you look at it today, yeah, it all seems much better and healthier. You can't put a price on that.
The Ruthless Aggression Era was the very difficult follow-up album. The WWE had exploded with the Attitude Era, and that called off. The company rebranded, and from 2002 to 2008 tried again. There were ups and downs, obviously. If you weren't around though, or just want to walk down memory lane, my name is Simon Miller, and it's 10 things you learn when binge watching it today. Number 10, the attitude adjustment. Sorry, I shouldn't have done it. I suck. It is just so obvious that when you do go through all this, WWE doesn't really know what to do. They were still doing well as a promotion, but compared to the Attitude Era, it was night and day. When you are a business, you don't want to compare the numbers and realize they're heading in the wrong direction. This is why some of the Ruthless Aggression days are way crazier than what came before, because my word, in a desperate attempt to refine the magic, some of the stories are just offensive. Even those involved came out after and said the same. That is why you get the Katy Vick story, the poorly ended Billy and Chuck angle, and hot lesbian action. That's not a figurative turn of phrase either. WWE just sent 2 women to the ring and told them to kiss. Stupid wrestling. It comes mostly in 2002 and 2003 as WWE sort of adjusts, but even after that, just so bad and has aged horribly. The Kane Triple H stuff especially, who thought necrophilia was good for anyone? Number 9, the very difficult single brand pay-per-views. This was always going to happen. As soon as WWE split Raw and SmackDown, the trial of single brand pay-per-views was going to start. Look at it this way. They don't do them today. Sums it up. While they were good in the sense more people got on the shows, it just took away the magic. These events seemed to happen every couple of weeks, and after a while they all blurred into one. Go back to 2007 especially and check out some of the matches. You won't believe they actually existed. For example, Christopher Nowinski and Rodney Mack versus the Dudley Boys. It's not that this was bad either, but to fill the card it was rushed and it felt like something you would have just seen on SmackDown. Pay-per-views can't feel that way, because the whole point is to get people to put their hand in their pocket. WWE persevered with this for 4 years, but yeah, it was most definitely not the answer. Number 8, the good women's wrestling. Now I get why you don't remember this. We just talked about hot lesbian action. It is such a shame though, as there were a group of women who couldn't be bothered with these out-of-date stereotypes, so went out of their way to prove regardless of sex, we can work just as well as anybody else. Trish Stratus reworked the whole division though, as did Mickie James, plus you had Beth Phoenix and Victoria just smashing each other right in the face. It's wrestling. WWE was still very much into the diva look, but this lot didn't care. Melina eventually worked herself into this mix too, and her I Quit match with Beth Phoenix at One Night Stand 2008 is just a war. Eventually Michelle McCool would carry this one, and she has been very vocal about it all. Management literally telling the women they're not allowed to wrestle like the men. I mean, that is just a stupid thing to say. Number 7, don't ignore the C shows. Today we have the likes of WWE Main Event and Level Up as our so-called C shows. They mostly exist to fulfill quotas, but hey, you do get some good matches between some up-and-coming talent, plus you'll see some main roster guys to boot. This was the same during the Ruthless Aggression Era, except the passages of time have been super kind to the likes of Velocity and Sunday Night Heat, because you can see the stars of tomorrow today. I mean, in August 2003, John Cena and Daniel Bryan just have a match, because why not? and you get Paul London versus Akio, which you have to see. You could put that on any show right now and people would love it. William Regal often turns up on these as well and goes full-on technical wrestling because there was less rules on these types of TV programs. It's almost like an alternative reality WWE. Here's a right treat to watch. I'm sure at the time people didn't get it, but that is the power of nostalgia. I think WWE has uploaded a few of these to their Vault channel on YouTube. Watch them all immediately. Number 6, WWECW is just weird. If you do indeed watch every single show during the Ruthless Aggression Era, it means you see the rebirth of ECW in WWE. It is so strange. It starts well because it is Extreme Championship Wrestling as much as it could be, but after a while, sheesh. Talk about watering something down. Some people blame the fact that WWE went PG in 2008, but that is not true. Long before that, ECW had become a cartoon because zombies and vampires turned up. I don't think that was part of Paul Heyman's vision. The December to Dismember pay-per-view is also widely regarded as a disaster, and there were so many issues with it behind the scenes. Paul and Vince McMahon fell out for years over it. Just a mess. Aside from the One Night Stand pay-per-views, there's just nothing really to see here. And if you do remember the late 90s, my word, you'll be sad. This was not it. Number 5, John Cena puts in the work. John Cena from 2002 to 2008 is just a warrior. Sure, eventually he was going to become a divisive figure, but we do not give him his dues. He took advantage of every single opportunity. Let us be clear too, while slightly unorthodox, Cena was always good on the ring. As he took on the likes of Kurt Angle, Chris Jericho, Triple H and Shawn Michaels, he raised the game. And even when he had to be the smaller man against the Big Show and Great Khali, he found a way. The man was damn perfect for WWE. The Falls Count Anywhere bout against Khali for One Night Stand 2007 is proof of this, because John makes you believe he is actually in trouble. It's a babyface masterclass. Cena never deserved the hate he did receive because most of that came from the way he was booked. That somehow translated into his overall work, but it's not accurate. There is a reason he changed the industry. That dude was ready. Number 4, the greatness of Batista. It is a recurring thread. Dave Batista does not get his due. This man was well better than we give him credit for. It took a while as we had to get through the ridiculous Deacon Batista alongside Devon Dudley, but come 2005 when he's had his Evolution run, and yeah, you can see why the powers that be picked him, not just because he's jacked. If nothing else, he gets mega pops every single time and the man looks like a star. I would imagine WWE breathed a huge sigh of relief when Brock Lesnar left in 2004, because they remember they had this guy. He steps in effortlessly. Big Dave is also a hero, as he has spoken about. Even when he was on top of the world, he was suffering with feelings of self-doubt and even anxiety. Talk about giving us the green light to feel okay about our own struggles. If this dude went through it, surely we all do. When he finally does go into the Hall of Fame, it'll be so deserved, but yeah, Batista is excellent, and the Ruthless Aggression Era sums that up. Number 3, the issues with the draft. The WWE draft or brand split has always had problems. The idea of ironclad rosters was never really enforced, so after a while the whole thing felt pointless. If they don't care, why should we? The Ruthless Aggression Era underlines this from 2004 to 2008, because while big stars are drafted all of the time, more often than not they'd end back on the same brand. So we were doing roster swerves. That is utterly ridiculous. WWE would also use it to troll people, like moving Jim Ross without telling him. And look at Triple H in 2004. We acted like Evolution were done because the game was back on SmackDown, and he didn't even wrestle one match on the blue brand, and then he was back on Raw. After the fact, it was like nothing had happened. It just shows WWE was always worried about going all in, and today, forget about it. It exists in name only, which I actually prefer if you care. Just let wrestlers go wherever the hell they want. Number 2, the lack of variety. You could say this is still an issue in many ways, but during this time, Vince McMahon was very much into the idea of minimum stats for men's wrestling being 6'2" and 225 pounds. If you don't fit those numbers, he don't care. You can argue John Cena and Randy Orton sort of fit into this too, but it's much more the wider roster. There was Matt Morgan, Luther Reigns, no relation, Mark Jindrak, Sean O'Haire. It made it really hard to stand out because the approach was very much a cookie-cutter one. You also had to have a tan, which is why Sheamus got so much chat when he turned up. People couldn't believe he hadn't tanned his ass. That's because everybody did. The real issue was the overall presentation, because the music was all the same too. Honestly, you think it's bad today, every theme is just generic rock track 8. Before long, everyone looks like a creator wrestler too, and even Brock Lesnar got dragged into this early on. The difference was he had Paul Heyman, and the Machine got super behind him. And yeah, that crazy athleticism. You could say others would have flown too if not for this, but hey, it's why we did go through so many bodies. At the end of the day, they all sort of felt replaceable. Number one, there is too much Mr. McMahon. And even he knew this. As controversial as it was, there's a reason he tried to kill his character off in 2007. There's nothing else to do. You can't take away what he did during the Attitude Era, as he was the perfect fall for Steve Austin. But much like a lot of the Ruthless Aggression period, it was just hoping lightning was going to strike twice. It did not. It's why Vince himself started to wear a do-rag and made himself ECW World Champion, because he felt like it would rile people up. And it did, totally the wrong way. There was also all that nonsense with D-Generation X, which wasn't all that good. It just featured so many poo gags, like watching a childlike television. You really feel it during this run because it almost feels forced. Really, once Stone Cold had walked off into the sunset, McMahon should have done the same thing, but I can give you the headlines right now. He did not. The Ruthless Aggression Era is so weird because depending when you started watching wrestling, it totally changes your feelings. If you're an Attitude Era person, you do not like it, whereas if you did start in the early 2000s, it is the best thing ever. Either way, there are a bunch of characters who have vanished from existence, and it's time to give them their due. I am Simon Miller. Let's go. Number 10, Katy James. So Katy James wasn't nobody. He trained alongside CM Punk and Adam Pearce. He was part of the class. He too made it to OVW before being called up in August 2006, where he teamed with Idol Stevens, who would go on to become Damien Sandow. They even had Michelle McCool as their manager. I think this was more a vehicle for Michelle, though, who got injured in 2007, because after that, this tag team went totally missing. WWE even moved him back to OVW, which is never great. And his next role was an enhancement talent on WWE's version of ECW. Now look, that is still a cool role to have when you think about it, but I don't think it's what James expected considering what he'd already done. Yeah, soon after that he got released. I do have to say I feel like if we had been a decade prior, KC would have done great in WCW. Just look at the guy. Number 7, Marcus Corvon. So this one is actually huge. Marcus Corvon was TNA's Monty Brown, and listen to me. In TNA, that guy was crazy over. He made the Pounce famous, and maybe nobody has done it better since, and in 2006 WWE came a-calling. This was not a surprise, he had earned it. He was also thrown into ECW as part of the New Breed faction, and this was the first mistake. Corvon was still great, but he was put in a bad spot. Vince McMahon didn't care about that promotion, so he never saw the power that was just waiting to be elevated. Come June 2007, Marcus took some time off for personal reasons, and clearly these were quite serious. Soon after, he retired from wrestling altogether. Number 8, the Dicks. Well, here we go. It's the bad times. Because Todd and Chad Dick debuted on SmackDown in 2005, and they were basically Chippendales. This is what was going to turn the business around. They were also drowning in baby oil and were called the Dicks. That wasn't meant to be deep either. WWE just wanted to name a team after some penises. Even Vince McMahon lost interest in this after a short while because they did get released, and their total time on the main roster lasted 4 months. Not sure why we decided to do this, especially because adult themes aside, this was straight out of the mid-90s. Their whole role was mostly to be scared of the boogeyman too. No wonder nobody remembers this. Number 7, the Heartthrobs. And speaking of the Dicks, this was basically the same damn thing. The major difference with Antonio and Romeo was they had a manager known as the Pocket Rocket. Oh, how I wish I was making this up. We have talked too much about groinal regions. They debuted in April 2005, so just before the Dicks, and then they got released on the same day. The WWE just went through their roster and released anything that was kinky. It's why tag team wrestling was just an afterthought during the Ruthless Aggression Era, as there just was no plan. We threw things at the wall, we just waited to see what was going to happen. The Heartthrobs mostly appeared on Sunday Night Heat 2, so even when they did arrive, they were basically just hanging out in the background. In all of that training, and then you get this? Sheesh. Number 6, Colin Delaney. So here's a fun fact for you, my friends. I was part of the Last Match Wrestling Rock Tour across the east side of the USA in 2024. One of the guest wrestlers was Colin Delaney. He's a very nice guy. He was brought in late 2007 for WWE's ECW brand. His biggest issue was he didn't look like a Vince McMahon wrestler. How ridiculous is that? Colin tried everything as he even turned heel, but again, because he couldn't bench press a car, in August 2008, Delaney was let go. Not sure he ever even got a proper chance, was just a name in the mist. It is cool that he's still going though, because it goes to show, if you do indeed want to be a wrestler, there is a life outside of WWE. Number 5, Luther Reigns. The older brother of Roman. That's of course a lie. It does connect to our last entry, however, because this was the total opposite. Given that Luther Reigns was huge, he got a job, he ticked that box. Look at this photograph, though. That is indeed Reigns slamming Eddie Guerrero on a 2004 SmackDown, and don't pretend you remember this. Guerrero was a major star by this point, so Luther was being used. Sort of. He also debuted at the time as Kurt Angle's assistant because he was the GM, so he did have a platform. There, though, we just didn't do much of anything. With that said, come 2005, he did face The Undertaker at the No Way Out pay-per-view. I honestly don't remember that. I went and watched the match too. I felt like I'd been tricked. Bruce Pritchard on his podcast talked about Reigns and admitted they were desperate for him to click because of his look. But let's be honest, he did not. Number 4, Amy Weber. So there is a lot more to this story, as after Amy Weber was released, she claimed Randy Orton and Edge bullied her backstage. Now, we don't know the truth, but it's important to talk about, and it all sort of feels like it was reflected in her WWE run. She did arrive as part of the 2004 Diva search before joining JBL's cabinet as the image consultant, but yeah. In the locker room, apparent arguments were happening with Edge and Orton, as well as the fact that Weber was not happy with her pay. I suppose all of that meant she ran foul of management as she was gone in 2005 when, yep, Jillian Hall was brought in to replace her, and that you likely do remember. For those who enjoy the trivia as well, Amy Weber wrestled one match on TV. Number 3, Sylvester Terkay. So this is another guy I actually do recall, and I have absolutely no idea why. It could come down to the fact that WWE pushed Sylvester Terkay as the next Kurt Angle, and we gotta stop doing that. The truth is there isn't a next Kurt Angle. He was one of a kind. He also arrived on SmackDown alongside Elijah Burke, so yeah, there you go. It was just another random tag team that we held together because why not? Now, Terkay was awesome on the mat and even faced Kurt in 1992 in an actual wrestling match where he lost. But that's fine. Angle won a gold medal with a broken frickin' neck. You can't just expect to be good at sports entertainment, though, and old Sly never really figured it out. It looked worrying early on as he was moved from the Blue Brand to ECW. And while he did win a lot of matches in early 2007, he found himself on the chopping block. The truth was he was just another face in the crowd. Boy, how did we have enough of those. Number 2, Rebecca DiPietro. WWE hired Rebecca DiPietro as she was an ex-Playboy model, and they thought she could go from backstage interviewer to an in-ring performer. That was the deal. It was pretty obvious straight away too, because even though she was eliminated from the 2006 Diva search, WWE still hired her and sent her to Deep South Wrestling to start learning the ropes. As the company wanted to keep her on TV, she was moved to ECW as a behind-the-scenes presenter, which brings us to Cyber Sunday 2006. Rebecca was used as an outside enforcer during the Lumberjill match between Mickie James and Lita, and then nothing. The thing is, it was Pietro who asked for her release in 2007, so take that for what it's worth. Maybe she knew something we didn't. Number 1, Sakoda. Well, at least he had an awesome name. Brian Sakoda was seen on WWE TV at first as a judge when Triple H and Scott Steiner had that bodybuilding pose down, which has to be one of the oddest wrestling debuts ever. He was then sent to developmental before arriving on SmackDown alongside Jimmy Wang Yang, who at the time was called Akio. They were also the henchmen for Tajiri. This went nowhere as Ryan was released in 2004, but he wasn't happy. He sued the WWE, saying they had medical records in relation to his brain health, which was subsequently ignored. And that is serious stuff. The court dismissed it as there was no evidence, and the sad news is Sakoda passed away in 2021 at just 48 years old. That is way too young. Obviously, Wang Yang would become Wang Yang, and Tajiri is still busy today. I mean, all of this was such a strange time for WWE. They really didn't know what to do post the Attitude Era. I mean, at least they've figured it out today.
Now sure, everyone understandably loves reminiscing about things like the legendary Eddie Guerrero winning the big one, the rise of Batista, Brock Lesnar and John Cena, and Trish Stratus and Lita main eventing Monday Night Raw. But what about those other magnificent, scarcely believable and often quite deranged occurrences this balmy Ruthless Aggression Era had to offer? Those ones that folks have largely just forgotten about, or maybe don't talk about as much. Well, have we got the list for you, baby? because from the minds of both myself and the great Michael Sidgwick, here are 20 incredible WWE Ruthless Aggression Era moments that nobody ever talks about. Number 20, the John Cena versus Great Khali feud. So before we get started, the period that we're going to cover here is between 2002 and 2008, because that's what people tend to think of when they think of the Ruthless Aggression Era, so that's what we're going to do. Now we've got that out of the way, Ruthless Aggression poster boy John Cena entered improbably awesome performances at Judgment Day and One Night Stand in 2007. Somehow, through his motivation, Arn Anderson's layouts, or perhaps a mystical force from up high, the man carried the Great Khali to something compelling and dynamic. Twice! Now, the Judgment Day main event wasn't necessarily good. Cena's opening barrage of punches made Shane McMahon look like Sugar Ray Robinson, for crying out loud, but it was inordinately effective. Cena at least threw himself down to the mat with a motivated snap. He knew that he had to create movement and some nightmarish oral thuds to get this over. Khali played his role remarkably well too, aiming his awful strikes at Cena's ears and even lifting his leg higher than he ever had in his life to connect with a back kick. It was majestic. The One Night Stand match was even better. An arena-wide brawl, it was significantly less tropey than many plunder matches WWE presents today. Virtually every single weapon that was used, like cameras and the crane, actually belonged in that environment, making it feel like a desperate Cena was grabbing whatever he could get his hands on to survive this onslaught. It was great stuff. Number 19, Velocity going nuts. Now, while the main roster was infested during Ruthless Aggression with some of the worst, greenest, most generic developmental atrocities you'll ever see, WWE did very gently flirt with the stylistic revolution on the nascent independent circuit. They signed Paul London, a fantastic, now severely underrated wrestler. He was super talented, but also handsome and telegenic, and thus, in the eyes of WWE and its soapy approach, more marketable than the rest. They still stuck him on C-Show Velocity and had him feud with Akio for ages though. WWE did not care about those matches, but the wrestlers did. They worked in vain, but treated every last one as an opportunity. Hypersonic aerial battles worked at a pace so blistering you could scarcely believe they were held under the WWE banner. This series wasn't just an exhibition of moves. A lot of thought went into it. In one match, Akio caught a London kick and sent him flying with a backflip. Now, usually this kind of counter only happens to allow the opponent to land on their feet and mount another attack. It's athletically impressive, but a bit contrived. This right here, though, was an actual attack. London bumped legs first on the ropes and then on his head with a horrific and rather awesome corkscrew motion. And more wrestlers should apply this level of intent to their work today, if you ask me. Number 18, one of the sickest matches ever. If Roderick Strong ever had cause to strangle out somebody's name, it wasn't when he was seeking the affections of Adam Cole. It was when he was getting pummeled half to death by Kurt Angle. Before he made a name for himself in Ring of Honor and Pro Wrestling Guerrilla, Roderick Strong was sacrificed to Kurt Angle as part of the latter's gold medal invitational. If the inexperienced chancer could survive 3 minutes with Angle, he'd take the gold. Angle asked Strong what his chances were. Strong said he didn't know, but he did know that he could slap Angle right in the face. And he did, really hard. This incensed Angle, who chased Strong around the ring. When they met inside of it for 2 glorious minutes, they may well have worked the most violent match in WWE history. And that's no exaggeration, folks. Angle worked this match like it was a shoot. Even by his standards, his intensity was just disgusting. After an absolutely fantastic near fall, the red mist descended further when Angle came close to losing. He smashed Strong repeatedly in the back of the head after furiously paintbrushing his face with slaps. The closest wrestling ever got to the hydrogen bomb versus coughing baby meme, Angle battered the back of Strong's skull so viciously that it's a miracle his forearm wasn't covered in brain matter. Angle then held Strong in a cattle mutilation position before headbutting his skull, grinding his forehead on it, and then eating it. The man was unhinged. Thick platelets of blood somehow didn't pool on the canvas. A disgusting suplex and ankle lock later, and the massacre was done. Except it wasn't, since Angle hooked the ankle and refused to let go. How did this make it onto WWE TV? And while we're talking about sick matches, I want to know right now, what do you think's the sickest match that you have ever seen on television? You let me know in the comment section down below. It's gonna take something pretty special to top that. Number 17, the 2005 pay-per-view streak. 2004 and 2006 were amongst the worst years in WWE history. Some of the pay-per-views, I mean, geez. People do not exaggerate when they say how WCW dying killed the industry. The talent pool was a stream of polluted storm water heading straight into the drain. It was bleak, man. It was the Spirit Squad and the Dudley Boys with not a table in sight headlining pay-per-views bleak. 2005, though, was infinitely better. The promotion was still desperate to chase Attitude Era buzz and controversy, manifesting in the awful Muhammad Hassan character and the unspeakable angle that led to his write-off. But bloody hell, the April to June 5-in-a-row pay-per-view streak was, at the time, the best run in the history of the promotion. Shawn Michaels bringing out the most disturbing, vengeful version of Kurt Angle by showcasing his own amateur wrestling credentials, highlighted a WrestleMania 21 that was forward-thinking even at its most mid. Backlash was a bit more shaky, but Batista proved his staying power in a superior main event sequel. Judgment Day promoted one of the sickest over-deliveries in WWE history with that gruesome John Cena vs JBL I Quit headliner. The first one-night stand was astonishingly great and authentic. It was just unfathomably special. And then Vengeance remains to this day nothing less than an all-timer, with Shawn and Kurt creating magic yet again, and Cena and Batista atoning for their not great Mania performances with a pair of rippers. Number 16, Triple H and Ric Flair blow the roof off Survivor Series. The worst thing about Triple H in his reign of terror wasn't that he was boring, although he was slow, dull, and somehow smug with it. No, the worst thing was the sabotage. He made Scott Steiner look awful. He took 23 seconds to pin Booker T in what looked like a parody of the Gotta Crawl to Protect My Finish near fall spot before racism actually won. He decided to work Goldberg like he was training him on his first day at Ohio Valley Wrestling. And one of Goldberg's nuts might as well have been hanging out for what it did for his aura. But if Triple H liked or even respected you, well, you had a half chance of not looking like a complete has-been know-nothing loser. And, well, he liked Ric Flair. Now, you think that Flair and Trips going 27 minutes might be a nightmarish experience, but it was actually superb and well worth the runtime. It might shock you to learn that Flair, at 56 years old, was really quite good at convincing people that he could not stand up under his own power. I know, I'm just as surprised as you are. That very real triumph drove the remarkable tension of a hidden classic. And Triple H was outstanding when he wanted to be. He was a precision killer in there. And in one awesome spot, he blasted Flair caked in blood on the floor with a spinebuster. Flair's back was wrecked in his mid-20s and he looked about 90 in Detroit that night. This felt like transgressive, dangerous, terrifying pro wrestling. Something Cody Rhodes might have studied ahead of AEW Double or Nothing 2019. Who knows? Number 15, Edge's Ric Flair impersonation skit. This one barely gets remembered for two reasons. Number 1, the D-Generation X Nation of Domination and New World Order 4 Horsemen sketches were far more infamous. And number 2, it's now difficult to recall a time in which Edge actually had patter. He plays a super intense and somewhat corny, vengeful badass these days to mixed results. He still has the odd one-liner in him, sure, but he's mostly known for his forehead vein now, as am I. Back in 2005, though, as the rated R superstar, he mocked Ric Flair's very real arrest for grabbing somebody by the throat in a road rage incident. While charges against Flair were eventually dropped when the witness to the assault failed to appear in court, that did not stop Edge from sending Flair up. The use of juxtaposition was brilliant. WWE could not have found a more bleak stretch of grey road, nor filmed on a more overcast day, as Edge, dressed as Flair, drove around in full gimmick. WWE, inadvertently perhaps, cast Flair as a total loser, whose tall tales of the glamorous travelling life were rather pathetic. Edge played it a bit like Shawn Michaels doing Hulk Hogan, every other word out of his mouth being woo! And in a great daft touch, instead of choking the victim, this Flair just chopped him. Number 4, Shawn Michaels and Triple H did have chemistry. Shawn Michaels and Triple H worked one great match together. Their SummerSlam 2002 war was a gripping, basic story elevated by Shawn's masterful selling. But elsewhere, they really took the PISS, didn't they? There are few things worse than a wrestling match that tries too hard to be good, to be worthy. At Bad Blood 2004, Shawn and Triple H went nearly 50 minutes in Hell in a Cell. It might be the most pretentious match of all time. They took a core idea. The spaces between the moves matter more than the moves themselves, and tried to be profound by lying around and doing absolutely nothing. The exhaustion was meant to reach the people, and oh, it did, but not in the way intended. The crowd was just bored to death. It says something about the absolute state of WWE in 2004, that, short of better options, fans actually voted for a rematch at Taboo Tuesday. Their bleak resignation Hogan was rewarded with a tighter, less masturbatory effort, which, while still not exactly a classic, was basically SummerSlam 2002, this time Shawn selling his leg. What a sequel. In this current era of content-forward wrestling, a lot of modern guys should probably study how to actually work through a storyline injury, or just watch some Shawn Michaels matches, because this guy could do it. Michaels didn't just explode into a move and then clutch at his leg, he wrestled as if it was hanging off. The whole thing, mirroring his opponent's assaulted quad tears, looked like a match that a wrestler forced himself to gut through when he was hurt for real. That's how good Michaels was, baby. Number 13, this incredible Shawn Michaels facial. Shawn Michaels played heel against Hulk Hogan in their incredible 2005 series, and driven with pure defiance, he hammed it up in a bid to embarrass his rival for Hogan's sheer temerity throughout the creative process. It was magic. Michaels wasn't merely being his old, brash self. He channeled the cutthroat shark of old, the guy who'd commit character assassinations just to get to the very top. He made Hogan look like a cringeworthy relic, a megalomaniac covered in wrinkly oil he called skin. It was fascinating, cathartic, and Michaels was simply so awesome in the 2000s that he made the parody of wrestling that was the SummerSlam main event feel, well, real. In a slightly less famous throwback to the old Shawn, though, Michaels executed the greatest fake-out in pro wrestling history when playing, since he had no choice, situational heel in Montreal. Less famous than his parody of Hogan, but far more scathing. When Bret Hart's music started playing in that arena, the place went absolutely nuts, and Michaels was priceless on the cell. He looked absolutely dumbfounded. He'd seen a ghost, and it wasn't a deer that he'd blasted to Kingdom Come returning to haunt him. It was Bret! Except it wasn't, and he just pissed himself laughing. Everyone was furious. It was great. It was great. Number 12, the best wrestling wedding ever. You might think wrestling fans are a bit of a nasty bunch. Some of them will call you terrible names for saying that an acclaimed wrestler might have one or two flaws to their game. Some of them will abuse you in your DMs for preferring one wrestling promotion to another. And yet they must be a bunch of softies deep down, because historically they tune into a wrestling wedding in their droves. Weddings are invariably a ratings hit, and the very best of the lot might well have happened in 2007. SmackDown general manager Teddy Long became besotted with Crystal, and the two were engaged very swiftly. And the ceremony was, well, it was just incredible. Jagged Edge were hired as the wedding band, and their song, Let's Get Married, was an absolute delight. Now, yes, a lot of the gags were a bit stupid. Crystal fell over her dress, Jillian Hall interrupted to sing a song of her own, but this knew exactly what it was. And Teddy's selling of his unfortunately timed cardiac arrest was brilliantly stupid and overacted. Now there's a sentence. Number 11, just how great WrestleMania 24 was. Now, people obviously talk about WrestleMania 24, it was a WrestleMania event, but they don't talk about it as one of the best ever. They should though. X7 gets the most praise for its range, its quality, its incredible scale. 19 is fondly remembered as an Attitude Era redux of sorts that peaked incredibly high across its demented Mr. McMahon theater, emotive Rock vs. Austin finale, and awesome pure wrestling in Shawn Michaels vs. Chris Jericho and Kurt Angle vs. Brock Lesnar. 3 and 5 boasted Hulk Hogan's most famous matches. 10 has the highest peaks. People rave about 31. 39 was one finish away from rivaling X7, and 40 was ace too. But 24 is probably the second best Mania ever. Yeah, I said it. The range was almost as impressive as X7, missing just one technical classic. That's it. That's all it's missing. The JBL vs. Finlay Belfast brawl was thudding black comedy that didn't overstay its welcome. The Money in the Bank match, while not a genre masterpiece, was still incredibly exciting and dangerous. Ric Flair vs. Shawn Michaels was as emotional a match as WWE has ever promoted, told with a unique take on the babyface versus heel dynamic. Floyd Mayweather vs. The Big Show was an absolute riot of a celebrity match, and the Edge vs. Undertaker main event was vintage big match drama elevated by Edge's counter-fueled brilliance in how he always had an answer to the unsolvable puzzle until, well, he didn't. Short on filler, WrestleMania 24 was a complete experience that absolutely flew by. Even the uninspiring Triple H vs. John Cena vs. Randy Orton WWE title match recognized that the three players had dominated that scene for what felt like forever, and instead of taking the piss, just got on with its unfussy, pulsating 14 minutes. And that's all we needed. Cheers for checking out this What Culture Wrestling video today, you awesome person you. Now hit that subscribe button and you will get more of this What Culture Wrestling stuff in your life. Now back to the video. Number 10, MVP is coming. Many moons before he was was managing the likes of the Hurt Business and Omos, Montel Vontavious Porter debuted on WWE TV as a hot free agent in August 2006. It wasn't long before the arrogant new heel found himself being signed to a big old deal on Teddy Long's SmackDown. And once the ink had dried on that lucrative contract, MVP only went and unleashed one of the most ridiculous and wonderfully heelish entrances of the era, demanding an inflatable tunnel with his moniker stamped on the front be shoved onto the ramp before he made his grand arrival. The star would then strut out of the outrageous blow-up tent and trigger an excessive amount of pyro out of some nearby MVP stickered boxes. It was just all kinds of dumb and unnecessary, but it only helped enhance an already full of himself character and made the annoying newcomer feel like a bit of a big deal out of the gate actually. And MVP himself may not have been a big fan of his entrance tune back in the day, but the former United States champion bursting through that tunnel with a chip on his shoulder to the sound of "I'm coming" was definitely one of the more underrated entrances of the time, especially his incredible debut arrival at No Mercy 2006. Number 9, Big Show and JBL being hit by tranquilizer darts. So incredible has two meanings, of course. It can be used to describe an amazing, magnificent thing, or something that's just, well, a bit unbelievable. And this weird, often forgotten entry falls into the latter category, and not in a good way. 2 years before MVP's official debut match at No Mercy 2006, a certain newly bald giant collided with a wrestling machine at that same pay-per-view. But do you remember how the monstrous Big Show ended up having his hair clipped off? Well, if not, then let me remind you. A few weeks before Show and Kurt clashed at the event, the latter decided to embarrass his gigantic adversary on SmackDown. After watching a video involving a gorilla being shot with a tranquilizer dart, the big lad thought it would be a wonderful idea to incorporate that balmy concept into his feud with the Olympic gold medalist. Only after being advised by a cruel Vince McMahon to pump said gun a few too many times, Angle ended up nearly firing the dart right through his pay-per-view rival before chopping off the balding star's locks. It's a properly mad moment, and one that has somehow managed to go under many a fan's radar, and hasn't been mentioned as much as it probably should have been in the years since. But the incredibly surreal, tranquilizing times weren't over by a long shot, folks. Fast forward a few months, and that same tranquilizer gun was being accidentally fired at JBL's ass on the Blue Show, with Amy Weber pulling the trigger during that taping in Japan. A night that also saw the then WWE champion awkwardly beat up an inflatable dinosaur in the middle of the squared circle. Childish boss Vince McMahon evidently got a kick out of all of this woozy silliness, whereas those few fans who do actually remember watching the latter uncomfortable and absurd segment in particular go down probably just wish they'd been on the receiving end of the weapon. Maybe there's a reason we don't talk about this. Number 8, Chris Jericho drops a stone cold beverage. As this list will highlight again before its end, it didn't matter that the Texas Rattlesnake wasn't quite the same badass SOB that folks had enjoyed throughout the Attitude Era. Stone Cold Steve Austin still found a way to more than make his mark on the time of Ruthless Aggression too. And one of the largely forgotten Stone Cold hidden gems from this era occurred back after the August 25th, 2003 edition of Monday Night Raw. Both Austin and his Broken Skull Sessions guest at the time, Chris Jericho, recalled the rarely revisited moment of post-show fun back in 2021, with the former AEW World Champion noting how his call to accidentally botch his catching of a Stone Cold beer was completely made up on the spot. What came next was one of both Attitude Era icons' funnier moments within a WWE ring, as Austin glared through Y2J's skull after Jericho failed to grab the incoming beverage again, to the sound of thousands of chuckles. It's a relatively small exchange, and one that wasn't designed to do anything other than briefly pop both Austin and the rest of the folks crammed inside the arena that night. But watching two masters of their craft effortlessly conduct an audience through some marvelously simple physical comedy will always be incredible to watch. Number 7, Stone Cold refs the Animal versus the Dead Man. Now easily the most memorable / infamous match this special guest bionic redneck found himself in the middle of during the period that followed John Cena screaming "Ruthless Aggression" went down at WrestleMania 20, of course. But while that contest was hijacked by a crowd who had zero interest in cheering on the monsters heading for the WWE exit doors, there was actually another occasion when Austin ended up reffing another somewhat incredible Clash of the Titans. Going down on the 2007 edition of Cyber Sunday, Stone Cold ended up being chosen as the special ref for the latest chapter in Batista and Undertaker's modern classic of a rivalry. And there is an argument to be made for this often overlooked World Heavyweight Championship showdown being the best of the two SmackDown mega stars many battles that year. After Austin had already stunned fellow refereeing options JBL and Mick Foley out of the building, Taker and Animal at the top of their games proceeded to brutally knock lumps out of one another for 17 minutes. Those in attendance sunk their teeth into a collection of epic near falls, with Batista's kicking out of the last ride and the Phenoms surviving of the first Batista bomb, causing 10,000 fans to sound like 100,000. Not even the dead man could survive a second explosive powerbomb though, as Austin enjoyed a relatively stress-free but still unquestionably thrilling day at the office. Crack a beer, man, you've earned it. Number 6, Snoop's first WrestleMania beatdown. Now, this global treasure may have popped up in the wrestling business on several magical and often absurd occasions over the years, but one of his most bizarre appearances in this industry, and a rarely discussed one, actually went down during the Ruthless Aggression Era. Hopping back to the 24th show of shows now, Snoop Dogg took on the role of Master of Ceremonies for a tag contest that involved Ashley Mazzaro and Maria Kanellis taking on Melina and Beth Phoenix. More on those two later. Oh, and this wasn't just any 2-on-2 match, folks. It was a Playboy Bunny Mania Lumberjill bout, because of course it was. As expected, the entire thing was little more than a way to show off the bodies of the then divas grappling within the division at the time, all while Jerry Lawler predictably and rather awkwardly drooled over the action on commentary. There was one positive to be found amongst the forgettable 5-minute double showing though, one that played out in darkness for 2 of those due to an also quite incredible lights malfunction, in response to a despicable Santino Marella costing Maria the match. That horny hero, Lawler, and an angry Snoop decked the Italian. The fact those moments and the visual of Snoop engaging in a never-ending snog with Kanellis post-match largely overshadow both the contest itself and the results are just a few of the reasons this incredibly awkward bit of business is rarely spoken about today. Number 5, a rather underrated and brutal ladder war. Few would be quick to remember this specific ladder war when the words Hardy Boys or One Night Stand are thrown their way, but in what was unquestionably one of the most underrated 2-on-2 clashes of the Ruthless Aggression time period, Matt and Jeff put on a pretty violent show opposite the world's greatest tag team at the 2007 event. Now, the Hardy Boys have obviously been involved in far more extreme, electric, and iconic ladder wars than this one on the one night of the year that WWE attempted to go fully hardcore. However, not enough love has been shown to this gritty and inevitably inventive World Tag Team Championship fight over the years. From the poetry in motion ladder sandwich to a fearless Shelton Benjamin's willingness to test just how many metal bumps his battered back could take, to one of the nastier ladder suplexes you're ever gonna see from Jeff to Charlie Haas. Both units were determined to steal the night, and they ultimately did exactly that, with the visual of Benjamin very nearly snapping his leg in two, eliciting a deafening roar from the crowd, as the Hardys sent the twosome tumbling to their doom on their way to successfully defending their straps. Now give it a watch and go and talk about it. Number 4, Simon Dean bites off more than he can chew. The Doctor of Thugonomics, the rated R superstar, the Hurricane. The Ruthless Aggression Era definitely boasted its fair share of fondly remembered gimmicks, but away from those far more regularly discussed characters found wandering around SmackDown Fists and the giant Monday Night Titantron, there was another wonderful personality that likely deserved more success than it ultimately experienced, generating all kinds of heat by blasting the folks watching on for their decision to scoff nachos over protein bars, watching the easy-to-despise fitness freak that was Simon Dean get battered by various top stars after trying to cram his Simon system down viewers' throats was a joy. And while some may actually be able to recall that amusing time the Animal tried some of his product before completely annihilating the cocky purple sweatsuited heel, arguably Dean's finest hour actually came on the April 4th, 2005 edition of Raw. After being rudely interrupted by that man again, the Texas Rattlesnake, Dean brilliantly squirmed his way through a never-ending series of stone-cold ordered push-ups. Then, in the wake of Maven inadvertently giving Austin a protein shower, an almighty can of whoop-ass was opened up on both as the Raw after WrestleMania 21 crowd went wild. The gimmick definitely rubbed folks up the wrong way, acted as the perfect foil for WWE's badass babyfaces, and was easily one of the most underrated comedy acts of the 2000s, before Dean finally left the company in 2007. Number 3, the ambulance epic that followed the testicle electrocution. The Big Red Machine was involved in some of the most disturbing and infamous moments this entire era had to offer, even before he locked eyes on Lita and helped kick off one of the most unsettling storylines in WWE history. The newly unmasked Kane had begun causing rather creepy and ridiculous chaos on Monday nights, targeting the McMahon family not long after setting Jim Ross on fire. This all ultimately led to Shane O'Mac feuding with The Undertaker's burned-up brother, in the wake of Linda being tombstoned by the Madman. Yep, that happened. And it was during this program when the son of the boss memorably wound up having his testicles electrocuted on national television. What a time. What is rarely discussed when looking back on this consistently balmy feud, however, is the absolute banger of an ambulance contest that closed out this never-ending war. At Survivor Series, the longtime rivals viciously battered one another around the arena, rammed cars into one another, and Shane even unleashed an ambulance-assisted coast-to-coast on the sinister big man. Now, it's not hard to understand why one of the strongest ambulance matches in WWE history is rarely referenced when talking about this routinely shocking Ruthless Aggression feud, of course. But this gripping conclusion and the hugely physical shifts both put in on the night are definitely worth your time, and it almost washes away those strange memories of Shane getting his balls zapped. Almost. Number 2, Beth Phoenix and Melina go for it at One Night Stand. And speaking of violent Ruthless Aggression contests that have been largely slept on for way too long, the One Night Stand pay-per-view once again delivered the underappreciated goods back in 2008. This time, no ladders were necessary. Instead, Beth Phoenix simply snapped Melina in half with her bare hands. Lita and Trish Stratus' main event fight on Raw in 2004 justifiably sits as one of the most important contests of not just the era, but women's wrestling in general. But this I Quit war between the Glamazon and the former MNM member also proved exactly what this next generation of talented women could do when given the opportunity to do more than dance around with Snoop Dogg. Everything from Phoenix gruesomely bending her flexible opponent's spine across her leg, to the star's ability to powerfully crawl her way out of trouble mid-hold, all highlighted Beth's unmatched physicality in between the ropes. But Melina also played the part of valiant babyface perfectly on the night, refusing to back down from her unstoppable adversary and cinching in her own array of delightfully tight submissions. This all set the stage for a horrific-looking glam slam submission hold finish, involving Melina again giving everything to keep from saying those match-ending words, only for Beth to transform her resilient enemy into the most disturbing small package you have ever witnessed. Look at that thing. If you've got a spare 10 minutes, then treat yourself to this incredible display of violence. And number 1, the sensational Royal Rumble 2005 commercial. Clearly inspired by the West Side Story musical, this ridiculously fun and sadly largely forgotten 2005 Royal Rumble commercial involves stars from both Raw and SmackDown singing about a very Royal Rumble. That's right, as they clicked, lip-synced, and mimed their way through a Vince McMahon nightmare. The likes of Rey Mysterio, Batista, Chris Jericho, Triple H, and so many more giving it their all in this gloriously cheesy piece of promotional material, while all donning various horrendous wigs, is rarely ever replayed or talked about almost 20 years on from its Broadway debut. Though the presence of Chris Benoit throughout may be one of the reasons WWE still refuses to really acknowledge the clip, which is obviously very understandable. The fact McMahon himself also signs off the bizarre 1-minute ad by shooting up out of bed and noting that's not the Rumble I had in mind, before the night he'd infamously rip both quads to shreds live on pay-per-view, is simply the icing on top of an incredible and talked about not nearly enough cake. Now sure, the era of Attitude contained a rattlesnake, a great one, and Mrs. Foley's baby boy. The new generation came equipped with hitmen, heartbreak kids, and Big Daddy Cools. But all things Ruthless Aggression more than held their own with groundbreaking figures, many a king, and various other main event animals when it came to lifting the big one. Gareth here from What Culture Wrestling, and here are the 10 best world champions of the WWE Ruthless Aggression era. Number 10, Trish Stratus. The Canadian future Hall of Famer may have initially found herself at the center of some routinely uncomfortable scenarios during her first few years as part of the WWE machine, but by the time the Ruthless Aggression era was up and running, Trish Stratus had established herself as the top lady in the company by some stretch. Whether she was taking it to longtime rival Lita in an historic main event of Raw, or at Unforgiven 2006, battling with Mickie James at WrestleMania 22 at the end of her 448-day reign with the title, or clashing with Victoria at 2002 Survivor Series, Stratus could typically always be counted on to deliver the goods whenever she was in the women's world title picture. Had it not been for those high-profile moments of unquestionable Stratus faction, then there's a solid chance many of the freakishly gifted women occupying occupying the wrestling landscape today may not have been inspired to lace up a pair of boots in the first place. Number 9. Kurt Angle. Kurt Angle's first few runs with the top straps in the company may have come during WWE's Attitude Era, but there's no doubting that his more memorable periods on top went down during the Ruthless Aggression portion of the WWE timeline. After feeling like a bit of a supporting character during the time of the Great One and Austin 316, Angle fully evolved into a wrestling machine main event sensation from 2002 onwards. Take your pick between his time as SmackDown's workhorse unexpected World Heavyweight Champion after Batista suddenly went down injured in 2006, his returning run as WWE Champion in the wake of falling to Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania 19, and his impressive spell holding that same strap leading into the show of shows. All three of the captivating reigns helped cement Angle as an all-time great top champ in the company. And perhaps the most impressive part of Angle's Ruthless Aggression era of World Championship supremacy was the way he managed to elevate the likes of Brock Lesnar, Charlie Haas, Shelton Benjamin, Rey Mysterio, and Randy Orton during his top-of-the-card spell. Number 8. Triple H. There's no denying that Triple H was one of the most decorated world champions operating in the period spanning 2002 to 2008. After being handed the recently created World Heavyweight Championship back in September 2002, the cerebral assassin went on to hold that belt for much of the subsequent hit and miss 3 years. A period that would ultimately become known as the Reign of Terror. You know, MJF's fave. Yet while that particular spell of dominance may have done more harm than good in the end, Trips did at least help put over stars like Batista towards the latter stages of the divisive run. In terms of generally more fondly remembered times the game spent on top though, many point to the future head of WWE creative stint as a SmackDown superstar post-2008 draft, whilst holding the WWE Championship as one of the most successful runs of Triple H's career. Here, the long-time main eventer was able to throw down in fresh programs with the likes of Edge and Jeff Hardy during what would ultimately become his longest period holding WWE's top prize. Number 7. Mickie James. Another trailblazer of the women's division who changed the game somewhat throughout the Ruthless Aggression era. Right out of the gates, Mickie James was able to stand out from the rest of the pack, with her legendary storyline worked opposite then women's champion Trish Stratus. Her obsessed fan turned heartbroken bitter enemy of the champ's spell helped eventually catapult her into a high-profile Mania 22 title win over the eventual WWE Hall of Famer. But this was merely the beginning of a decorated and hugely influential run for James, one that would eventually see her lift the women's championship on 5 separate occasions, on top of a solitary Divas title reign too. A notable Survivor Series 2006 battle with Lita that acted as the fallen champ's full-time send-off, and a somewhat underrated fight with Beth Phoenix on an April 2008 edition of Raw over the women's world title strap are just a few examples of James well and truly elevating the division at a time when women's wrestling still wasn't being taken as seriously as it thankfully would be a little later down the road. Unquestionably one of the most gifted in-ring and on-the-mic champs to grace WWE's women's division, and a surefire future Hall of Famer. Number 6. Eddie Guerrero. Still ranking as one of the greatest babyface upsets in WWE history, Eddie Guerrero's title belt-assisted conquering of the Beast at No Way Out 2004 will never not bring a smile to the average wrestling fan's mug. And while it may not have ultimately been the longest of reigns by any means, with Latino Heat dropping the title to JBL just 4 months after toppling Brock Lesnar, it still came equipped with some of the most memorable performances and moments of the Ruthless Aggression era, along with a classic showing opposite Kurt Angle at WrestleMania 20, one containing arguably the most creative finish of the era thanks to a cheeky loose boot. Guerrero also put on a few great showcases against JBL that helped put over the eventual longest reigning WWE champion in SmackDown history. The iconic star was taken far too soon and likely could have added another few adored runs with the WWE or World Heavyweight Championship strap had he not tragically passed away in 2005. But his brief time lying, cheating and stealing at the top of the blue brand will always be fondly remembered by the wrestling world. Number 5. Randy Orton. Picking up the first few of what would ultimately go on to be a staggering 14 world championships during the time of all things Ruthless, Randy Orton managed to win both the WWE and World Heavyweight Championships within his first 5 years of being a main roster player. Neither of those initial runs with the top titles would sit as one of his most dominant or impressive, it must be said, with Orton ultimately dropping the World Heavyweight Championship to his one-time Evolution leader Triple H after about a month, and being initially dethroned by Trips again after being rewarded the WWE title at No Mercy 2007. That being said, the Viper would at least regain that belt later on in the night, conquering the game in a last man standing match, and he'd then go on to enjoy his longest reign with the WWE strap from there on out, defending it for 202 days against the likes of Chris Jericho, John Cena, Shawn Michaels and Jeff Hardy. Hardy. And it was that dominant run in particular that helped really establish the slippery snake of a heel as a main event threat not to be messed with, as he sadistically tormented his prey on the mic and in between the ropes. Number 4, Brock Lesnar. Everyone has their go-to champ when thinking about a certain world title design or era in WWE history. In the case of the spinner strap, it's likely Super Cena. The winged eagle usually evokes memories of the Hitman. And when it comes to the WWE Undisputed Championship that would eventually become SmackDown exclusive from August 2002, most would almost immediately conjure up the image of the next big thing flexing his traps with the gold around his massive waist. And it's not hard to see why, really. From the minute he conquered The Rock to become the youngest WWE champion of all time at SummerSlam 2002, Brock Lesnar set about dominating the landscape and putting on some of the strongest bouts of the era. His always impressive and grueling contests opposite stars like Kurt Angle, The Undertaker, Big Show, and Eddie Guerrero all helped immortalize the Beast as the freak main event sensation he looked destined to become from day one. This increasingly epic run only lasted around 2 years, of course, with Brock ultimately kissing goodbye to sports entertainment for nearly a decade after WrestleMania 20. But his time reigning as SmackDown's top guy still routinely produced some of the Blue Show's finest ruthless aggression moments. Number 3, Edge. Coming into 2005, the evidently talented Edge had just never quite clicked as the top-of-the-card superstar he always had the potential to become. But a victory in the inaugural Money in the Bank ladder match and shift towards a more dastardly and opportunistic character finally appeared to be setting the stage for that long-awaited level up. Still ranking as one of the most shocking cash-ins of all time, Edge would lift his first ever WWE Championship after pulverizing John Cena post-Elimination Chamber War at New Year's Revolution 2006. And while this first reign wouldn't even last a month, it still contained one of the most controversial moments in Ruthless Aggression history in the form of that live sex celebration insanity, after then cementing himself as a main event heel to be taken seriously in his freakishly extreme fight with Mick Foley at Mania 22. The rated R superstar eventually proceeded to pick right up where he left off in July of that year. That second WWE Championship win would pave the way for absolutely stellar contests opposite his great rival John Cena, with an unforgiven TLC classic being the pick of the bunch. And from there, Edge would inevitably cheat, scheme, and sneak his way to a few World Heavyweight Championship victories too, with his particularly notable spell with the strap from Armageddon 2007 to WrestleMania 24, leading to another in-ring masterpiece opposite The Undertaker in the Show of Shows main event. Number 2, Batista. As already noted, the Animals Classic program opposite his former Evolution mentor, The Game, heading into WrestleMania 21, fully established Batista as a person capable of carrying the company into the future. His crowning moment on the grandest stage sits as one of the most memorable visuals of the entire Ruthless Aggression era, and it just so happened to kick off one hell of a World Heavyweight Championship reign. The initial 282-day period holding the big gold belt saw Batista fully grow into an undisputed top guy, emphatically battering The Game on 2 more occasions before being drafted to SmackDown. But this all-conquering and celebrated babyface run was ultimately forced to an abrupt end due to an unfortunate injury in January 2006. Delivering on his promise to regain his belt before WrestleMania 23 though, Batista resumed his era of Blue Show dominance at Survivor Series, before ultimately getting locked into one of the greatest feuds of the time with The Undertaker. Their Mania 23, Cyber Sunday, and Survivor Series wars all simply further cemented the eventual Guardian of the Galaxy as one of the most dependable and effective world champions ever to walk alone in the time of Ruthless Aggression. Number 1, John Cena. Along with being the person synonymous with the legendary 2 words that would define an era, John Cena's time holding the WWE Championship during the Ruthless Aggression period in WWE laid the foundations for his eventually unrivaled time sitting at the very tippy top. Things got off to a fiery and passionately supported start, with the plucky underdog seeing off JBL at Mania 21 to win his first world title. A quick spinner makeover later, the champ was well and truly here, and he'd go on to hold the garish belt for 279 days as he overcame the likes of Kurt Angle, Chris Jericho, and Shawn Michaels on The Red Show. A second spell with the strap after a brief rated R detour would see Cena famously collide with the King of Kings at Mania 22, during a time when fans were beginning to grow tired of this particular face running the place. But countless other iconic moments in time were brought into existence by Super Cena from here on out, with his defiant last stand in an ECW ring against Rob Van Dam, hellacious war with Edge at Unforgiven, last man standing clash with Umaga at the 2007 Royal Rumble, and many more top displays opposite HBK, Bobby Lashley, and Randy Orton, all guaranteeing that he would be forever remembered as the greatest world champ to put it all on the line throughout the era he helped get underway in his bright red trunks. As the years would roll by, some of these lesser known Ruthless Aggression faces would very much carve out chart a place for themselves in the industry. But it's still safe to say that very few are quick to think of those famous two words spouted by Super Cena all those years ago whenever these particular names are thrown into the average wrestling conversation. So I am Gareth here from What Culture Wrestling, and here are 10 wrestlers you didn't know were in WWE's Ruthless Aggression Era. Number 10, Brad Armstrong. Known primarily for his work in the NWA and WCW over the course of his 30-plus year run in the business, this smooth in-ring worker had the look of a star who could become a real player in the industry. Brad Armstrong never really rose to the level of anything other than a rather underrated talent though, with his brother Road Dogg Jesse James going on to become the most famous of the Armstrong siblings instead. Brad would at least finally get a shot at making a splash in the WWE sphere towards the latter stages of his wrestling career. Showing up a few months into WWE's ill-fated ECW brand experiment, the former WCW light heavyweight champion would make a few appearances as a guest commentator alongside the likes of Taz and Joey Styles in 2006. His often forgotten time in front of a WWE camera during the Ruthless Aggression Era wouldn't last, however, with Armstrong eventually stepping back into a producer role for the rest of his time under the Sports Entertainment banner. The late, highly respected worker would also wrestle the odd ECW house show match around this time too. Number 9, Johnny Gargano. Johnny Gargano no doubt jumped at the chance to make his dreams come true back in 2007. You'd definitely be forgiven for missing this mid-Ruthless Aggression Era appearance ever being a thing, mind, given the fact Johnny Wrestling looked almost unrecognizable as MVP's champion of Liechtenstein challenger on a March edition of SmackDown. As Cedric Von Hausen, the nephew of a person JBL supposedly bumped with one time, a geeky Gargano waved and smiled his way down to the ring before getting his head clotheslined off by the loudmouth future Hurt Business leader. A dominant squash followed, of course, with MVP picking up some Lederhosen momentum en route to challenging for the US title at Mania 23. The eventual NXT champion also made a few other cameo appearances before finally making a name for himself on the developmental brand, showing up as an awkward security guard on NXT in 2010 and getting battered by Brodus Clay as Joey Gray on Superstars a year later. WWE dreams really do come true, eh? Number 8, Tommaso Ciampa. There's getting the chance to rub shoulders with a few well-known mid-carders during your first ever WWE showing, and then there's going one-on-one with The Undertaker on a July 2005 edition of SmackDown. That's precisely the surreal position another future NXT champion found themselves in all those years ago, with Tommaso Ciampa being forced to act as Muhammad Hassan's lawyer during his controversial rivalry with the Phenom. Sure enough, after his Thomas Whitney Esquire read out a statement from his client in the middle of the Blue Show's ring, Taker proceeded to chokeslam and tombstone the eventual Blackheart straight to hell to the sound of many a cheer. This wouldn't actually be Ciampa's only ruthless outing though, as Damaso Whitney, the then beardless face, was utterly battered by Jamie Noble in a December edition of Velocity before teaming with Kofi Kingston in a dark match during an August 2006 edition of Heat. A developmental deal would eventually follow in 2007, but Tommaso would eventually part ways with the company before the end of the year, paving the way for a successful run on the indies that would ultimately take him back to his former employer almost a decade later. Number 7, Marcus Corvon. Bulldozing his way through the TNA roster back in the early to mid-2000s, Monty Brown definitely had the makings of a powerhouse superstar of tomorrow. Despite sitting as one of the most popular personalities on show at the time though, the company never fully pulled the trigger on an alpha male run with the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. Rather than going on to prove all those who clearly doubted he had what it took to carry the big one in his former workplace, upon eventually signing with the biggest wrestling organization on the planet, however, Brown's time in WWE was about as unmemorable as they come. Popping up on the aforementioned failed experiment of an ECW brand in January 2007, the newly rechristened Marcus Corvon soon joined forces with Elijah Burke, Matt Striker, Kevin Thorne, and Ariel to form the New Breed. Remember them? No, you do not. The unit did actually get something of a surreal WrestleMania moment in the end, battling against a team of ECW originals at Mania 23 in a losing effort. Outside of that bizarre but still somewhat unremembered highlight, Corvon's time as part of the Ruthless Aggression Era simply acted as another missed opportunity to create another big-time star, and the pouncing sensation would soon call time on his wrestling career altogether in the wake of being released in September 2007. Number 6, Idol Stevens. The performer eventually known as Damien Sandow actually first attempted to make an impact on WWE television during the Ruthless Aggression Era, donning the name of Idol Stevens after being bullied by the APA when dressed as the Easter Bunny at Vengeance 2003. A star fresh off of 3 years in developmental finally looked to make it big in a unit alongside Casey James and Michelle McCool. Unsurprisingly though, the concept of two dudes acting as McCool's favourite teacher's pets didn't exactly catapult either man to superstardom, but they did at least get a tag title shot against Brian Kendrick and Paul London at No Mercy 2006. Shortly after that failed attempt to win the gold, however, Cena. Both men were sent back down to OVW before Stevens was ultimately released in August of the following year. His second bid to become a featured WWE player from 2010 onwards was a little more successful, of course, with Sandow winning Money in the Bank and getting somewhat over via his many comical impersonations and much-loved stunt double work alongside the Awesome One. Sadly though, it once again all ended in release in 2016 on the back of WWE entirely fumbling his eventual breakup with The Miz. Number 5, Jon Moxley. Back before he'd ever locked fists with Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins or really made that much of a splash on the independent scene, Jon Moxley made a string of wholly surreal and easily forgotten appearances on WWE programming during the Ruthless Aggression Era. What you will likely struggle to erase from your memory after discovering this strange spell though is that damn hair. His first long-haired showing in a sports entertainment ring came back in 2006, battling against MNM on Velocity alongside Brad Taylor in January of that year. That tryout defeat would then be followed by another entirely overlooked handicap battle with The Big Show on Heat, with Mox and Dick Rick, a pre-year LA Knight, getting the former part of that guy's name knocked in the dirt by the Giant. Finishing off this trifecta of dreamlike tryout encounters, a bright pink hair sporting future AEW World Champion then went one-on-one with another man who just so happened to boast a name inspired by a penis. Mox was once again bested during this January 2007 Heat fight with Val Venus, but his work, or perhaps just that outrageous do, clearly caught the attention of those in the back, as he ended up signing a developmental deal a few years down the road, and the rest was violent history. Number 4, Greg Valentine. Popping up in the WWF time and time again over the course of the 70s, 80s, and 90s, Greg the Hammer Valentine ultimately earned himself a place in the WWE Hall of Fame by the time 2004 came around. But not content with just picking up his ring and kissing goodbye to throwing down inside of a WWE one, it's often forgotten that the veteran worker actually briefly threw down during the Ruthless Aggression Era too. A year on from earning that prestigious honor, Valentine suddenly found himself in an October Heat matchup with Rob Conway, after a set of legends unleashed hell on the cocky heel during Raw's homecoming show a few weeks earlier, and the Hammer put in a decent enough showing opposite the slimy one-time La Resistance man. That was until Eugene showed up to blast Conway and cost Valentine a one-off win, something that led to a blast-off Greg shoving away a distraught Nicholas Dinsmore to bring the entire bizarre situation to a strange end. Far from being the end of the road for this aging legend though, Valentine would go on to wrestle sporadically until 2019 and clock up a staggering near 5 decades in the business. Number 3, Vader. October 2005 also saw the unexpected return of Vader on an entirely peculiar edition of Raw. Ruthless aggression, man. Ruthless aggression. With Jonathan Coachman's planned match with Stone Cold Steve Austin being scrapped on account of the Texas Rattlesnake apparently being involved in an accident, the coach soon found himself being hunted down by his substitute in the form of Batista. And with the panicking heels back up in Goldust quickly being overwhelmed by the World Heavyweight Champion, the Mastodon soon shockingly arrived to overpower the Animal. This sudden comeback, one which also came equipped with a rather unfortunate stumble for the former IWGP Heavyweight Champion, actually marked the first time Vader had appeared in a WWE ring in 7 years. Then in another strange Ruthless Aggression moment that feels like something fresh out of a damn video game, the monstrous generations would clash once again at Taboo Tuesday, when Big Dave spinebuster the colossal legend on the way to victory against the odd collection of villains leader. That's one way to pass the heavyweight superstar torch, I guess. Number 2, Velvet Sky. In the time prior to signing on the TNA dotted line and ultimately becoming an integral part of the Beautiful People group, Velvet Sky actually attempted to get her foot in the WWE door on a few occasions from 2005 to 2007, on the back of appearing as an extra during JBL's Celebration of Excellence on a February 2005 edition of SmackDown, and then Talia was bested by eventual TNA rival Victoria on a July episode of Heat. Sky would also appear alongside Trinity on another Heat show in January 2006, this time as a planted audience member who ultimately shared a dance with the Heartthrobs after their bout. 2007 also saw the future multiple-time Knockouts champion audition for WWE's Diva Search, though she wouldn't make the final 8 in the end. WWE's Ruthless Aggression Era loss was TNA's gain in the end, as Sky would eventually forge a respectable career in the Impact Zone from 2007 onwards. Had WWE taken a chance on a talent Mick Foley once claimed would be a valuable addition to their roster though, then perhaps Impact's awesome Knockouts division would have been deprived of one of its most popular Beautiful People. Number 1, Frankie Kazarian. Speaking of eventual TNA/Impact veterans who tried their hand at making it in the land of sports entertainment, former TNA X Division and World Tag Team Champion Frankie Kazarian could also surprisingly be found in the thick of the Ruthless Aggression chaos. In between stints in the company he would ultimately become synonymous with, Kaz opted to sign with WWE in 2005, and after a few months down in OVW, the future AEW man was finally given his debut on Velocity, boasting a gimmick that saw him confirmed confessing to being the future of Vinnie Mac's company. Said future lasted a grand total of about a month, with Kazarian reportedly later claiming his decision to quickly part ways with the biggest promotion on the planet largely stemmed from it becoming clear that the company had zero intentions of properly revamping its cruiserweight division. He then returned to his former home a year on before later making an impact on both Ring of Honor and the Land of All Elite as the years rolled by. But it still makes for a pretty strange visual to see the longtime TNA legend spouting some cocky words into a WWE mic backstage before taking it to Nunzio inside of one of their squared circles. You really just never know who you're gonna spot next during a cheeky revisit to the bizarro world known as the time of Ruthless Aggression, eh?